great to see you. As always, we are live now. So I'm going to start to share.
Woohoo!
Well, hello everybody. You can see that we're here. We've started. We're going to spend a few minutes sharing. I know you're ready for that because it's what we always do. And I have Stephanie with me tonight, who I will properly introduce in just a few moments.
Hi, everybody who's joining us.
And I see Dolores is already here on Facebook as well as on YouTube. And there's Amber. Hello, Amber. It's great to see you, as always. Yes, Amber and I are old friends. That is before the Red Berets. And let me get a few more shares in here. I have these pages I usually share to. But lately, no one's been coming to those pages. So I just think it's better to share to groups. Of course, I have to share to the Red Berets. Red Berets, Medicare for all. Just one more group to share to. We can get going. Okay, that should do it. I'm going to close my Facebook page to stop echoes. And here we are. I guess we got a pretty good showing already with 14 people here. Let's take away the promo now. Hello, everybody. Of course, you're at the In-Depth Show. And I'm your host, Joe Firestone. With me tonight is Stephanie Gallardo, who is running for Congress, candidate for Congress, but running in the primary for the Washington 9th District.
That's right.
That is the district in which the present congressman is Adam Smith, a longtime congressman who's been doing nothing for the people. Sarah Smith gave him a good run a couple of years ago, but he's had it mostly to himself for a long time now. But I think Stephanie is going to give him a very, very good run. She has a great platform. It has most of the main things that anybody, or maybe all of the main things that anybody with any sense would like to see, including something that is rarely mentioned by candidates for Congress these days, but that is overwhelmingly important. So I'm going to turn the mic over to Stephanie now and ask her to talk about herself and her platform. And of course, I'll be interrupting every once in a while with some questions, but you'll mostly be hearing from her tonight, at least for some time. Before I do that, I guess, one more second, I do want to say hello to folks at this point. So hi, Dolores. Hi, Carmen Muniz. Hi, Amber. And hi, Steve Day. Nice to see you. And Lana Dell says howdy. Lisa Theobald says hello. Steve Day says, while waiting, hashtag mint the coin. Indeed, mint the coin. And Jeff Denton says, share to South King County groups. Thank you, Jeff. I'm sure that's very relevant for Stephanie. Carmen says, shared and invited with pleasure. Thank you, Carmen. Jason Cole says, watching. Hi, Jason. So glad you're here tonight. Jason says, Adam Smith has the most conservative career voting record of all Washington House Democrats. I'm sure that's very true. And Laura says, hello, hashtag Red Berets, hashtag FOAF. Looking forward to this interview, Stephanie. And as always, thank you very much, Joe. Thank you very much for coming, Laura, and for boosting the live stream tonight. Okay, Stephanie, it's all yours.
All right. Thank you. I also want to say hi to all the folks that were just mentioned. Thanks so much for tuning in tonight. My name is Stephanie Gallardo. I am a high school history teacher. I am also a labor organizer with the National Education Association. I say I'm a high school history teacher, but actually I just left my job in June so that I could do this campaign full time. But as most people understand, the bills don't wait. So I actually did start doing substitute teaching to get some supplemental income for my husband and I. So I'm currently a substitute teacher working all up and down South King County, mostly in the south end of Seattle. So I am pretty much your non-traditional candidate. I did not imagine that I was going to run for this specific position, but I did always see myself in politics. I didn't envision that it would be as a politician, but I've definitely been a part of movements for a very long time. Something that's really important for me to talk about, of course, is always my family. And the reason that they're so important to me is because of the political education and the foundation that they provided me. So I'm the daughter of Gabriel Gallardo and also Veronica Gallardo. I'm the granddaughter of Reyes, Luisa, Tilio, and Victoria. And I just want to speak their names into the room and honor them because they are 100% a part of my journey and are the inspiration for why I've decided to run for Congress. So my father's side of the family, they were originally refugees. They arrived here in the United States in 1976. And that was after about 3 years of my grandfather being in a political prison camp, mainly a torture camp. He was there for 3 years and he, suffered for being a socialist. He was a socialist city council member in a little tiny town in the south of Chile where my family's from called Los Muermos. And when I was growing up, we were constantly told stories about what it was like back in Chile and the family that we had built there. And it never became really real to me until I finally was able to go home to Chile for the first time when I believe I was 21 or 22 years old. And in that time frame, my father had never been back to Chile. It was too traumatic for him. He had been held at gunpoint as a 12-year-old and been told, that his father was a terrorist because he was a socialist. And there was just a lot of trauma in going back to Chile. But it just so happened that my father ended up going back with me for the first time. And so when I did go back to Chile, it was a huge party. It was like a town-wide party. And the reason I bring this up is because, as I mentioned earlier, my family is really the reason why I got involved in politics in any way, shape, or form. The original path that I took was through education. And as I mentioned earlier, I am a teacher. And when I graduated from college, the reason why I wanted to go into education was because I thought at that time that education could help us dig ourselves out of the issues that we're seeing in our society today. But what I've come to realize as an educator is that that's just absolutely not true. Education, of course, is instrumental and a huge part of how we can better ourselves, how we can, become the change that we want to see in this world. But the fact of the matter is that the system, this capitalist system that we're all trying to survive in, is what's really at the root of all the issues that we're having as a society and also globally. And so when I was, in my second year as an educator, I taught at Foster High School in Tequila. I ended up very randomly running for a position on our board of directors for the state education association, Washington Education Association. And I ended up winning. It was very random. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I didn't even know that I had to give a speech in front of 2,000 people, and I was against 11 people. And so this was my first little dip. It was like dipping my foot into the world of politics. And at the time, I didn't realize that it was the world of politics. Many folks might understand that unions are very, very interconnected with political parties. But what I came to understand is that my union in specific, the National Education Association, is extremely intertwined with the Democratic Party. And that was one of the reasons that I decided to step up for this position, because I saw better not only for my union, but I saw better for my community. And, it's a tough thing I'll be real with you, to run on the Democratic ticket. It's not something that I feel extremely amazing about, but it's what I've chosen to do, and I'm committed to it. But I do believe that I can impact change, not within the Democratic Party, but within the system that I'm hoping to change. So I want to be very clear about that. Now, with regard to my campaign platform, my platform is very much informed by my community. And I'll also be real with you, it is very much informed by my own life and my own life experiences as a Latina, as the daughter of a refugee, as an educator, as a labor organizer. I think a lot of times the big issue with legislators is that they legislate for other people because they're actually not those people. And that just is not the case for me. And I think that's also one of the big differences between myself and my opponent, is that he is constantly legislating for communities that he's not a part of. And that's just not how it's going to work for me. I'm already part of these communities. And of course, I can't be part of every single community. But I think I have a much more respectful way to be able to engage with other communities that are not my own. And so my platform is, a large platform. I think, Joe, you saw it. There's a lot there. But I'll start with the first three. The top three priorities for my platform are education, building labor union power, and creating a moral immigration system. And I'll just very briefly talk about each of those things. And then, Joe, I'm sure you might have some questions for me. But with regard to the education system, one of the reasons why I decided to run this campaign is because there are so few educators in Congress who actually understand what's going on in our classrooms, and who have a connection to young people. And I think it's really important that our legislators are connected to young people, because they're the ones who are leading and are at the forefront of so many of our movements. And so what I see as what needs to be changed within our education system, I'm really excited about Jamal Bowman's Green New Deal for public schools, because it's one of the largest investments in public schools that we've had, or that is being proposed historically. And I'm really interested in seeing that be passed. And once I'm a Congress member, I'd absolutely be a proponent and a champion of that legislation. And, the school to prison pipeline is also a major, major issue. Having police in schools, detentions in schools, things like this lead students down a path that is very challenging and that criminalizes them from the get-go, and then, leads them in a path that they might not be able to get themselves out of. And so, more on education. Of course, we want a cancellation of debt, cancellation of all student debt, not just a little bit of debt, cancellation of all student debt. We want free community college. We want education to be accessible for everyone, not just those who have money to be able to send their kids to school. And with regard to a moral immigration system, something that I recently spoke on, it's a very personal topic. I made a statement with my husband about the fact that he's an undocumented person and he's living in the United States without documentation. And, the reason I bring this up is because the experiences not only of undocumented people, but of people who are refugees or have varying immigration statuses. They live a different life here in the United States than people who have documentation. And they live often in the shadows, and they're often fearful and don't know what's the next move because they're afraid ICE might come pick them up. And so I'm running on a platform that is completely abolishing ICE. We do not need this institution. It's antiquated and new at the same time. It's an antiquated institution, the way that they try to round up people, put children in cages. And it's also a new institution because it was only created, I believe, in the 2010s. And so it is something that we absolutely do not need. And I mentioned just a second ago, I'm absolutely 100% against having people in detention. There are ways to go about ensuring that, people are living healthy lifestyles in this country and are undocumented at the same time without putting them in cages. So that's really, really important to me. And then the last thing, my labor union platform. As a labor leader, it's really important to me that our labor unions are interconnected and intertwined and working together because we have to build a mass movement of working class people to be able to uplift the issues that we have right now. We need a working class coalition of people to be able to bring political education to our communities, teach folks about what is actually going on with this capitalist system that we're all trying to survive in. And so what I'm hoping to do is not only strengthen labor unions, increase access to labor unions, not make it illegal to be able to organize in, your workplace to try and organize with your coworkers, but make labor unions the true foundation of our country. And so that's just a little bit, Joe.
Okay, Stephanie. Let me ask a few questions.
Sure.
Sounds like a good time to ask a few questions. Okay, first of all, when it comes to an immigration system that, is moral, I completely agree with everything that you said, including the abolition, of ICE.
Yeah.
ICE actually started in 2003. It was part of the response to 9/11, which involved the reorganization of the federal system.
Mm-hmm.
And ICE was included in the Department of Homeland Security in that move, and given a new name. The ICE name, was a new name for the old agency that had pre-existed. But yes, they are an agency which is rather cruel, rather totalitarian in their methods, extremely inconsistent with what we hope will become the small d democratic system here in the United States that we aspire to, but no longer have if we ever did. All of your suggestions, or all of your priorities, I should say, since they're much more than suggestions, but all the bullet points that you state in your platform, which, by the way, I provided a link to right at the top of the chat. If people want to go to the platform, there's a link to it there. Okay, but I agree with all of the bullet points. I think they are essential for us to have. Our public schools have been deteriorating now in the United States for a very, very long time. And we really need to overhaul them totally. They're so essential for democracy. Some of the specifics: tuition-free public college. I don't know if I would put them in a larger education category, education justice, but they are part, okay, of education justice, of course. That is an appropriate place to put them. But they are so front line in terms of what should happen. For example, Biden could cancel all student debt now by executive order. He doesn't even need Congress to do that. And he simply will not do that. But it would be nice if in the intervening months before you get to Congress that he made that particular move. I personally think it would be a very smart move for him to make. But from a political point of view, it would give people a reason to vote for Democrats in 2022. Right now, they don't have much reason to vote for Democrats.
Right.
I agree about Jamal Bowman's act. I think that is a very, very good act. I think it's unfortunate that he has not been pushing it more, that the squad has not been pushing it more.
I agree.
And that gets to my question. Jamal Bowman is a person who apparently has a lot of fire in his belly. He's also a very sophisticated, well-educated person with real presence. Some of the other squad candidates who preceded him, specifically Rashida Tlaib, has been around the block herself, a few times before coming to Congress. She is very well educated and very sophisticated and has a lot of fire in her belly too. And then, of course, there's AOC and Ilhan Presley, who has a great deal of presence herself. Okay, I look at Ilhan and I think there is really a courageous person. Actually, I admire them all from a personal point of view. And yet, when January 3rd of 2021 rolled around, they voted for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker of the House when they had the votes to deny her the speakership. It wouldn't even have taken the whole CPC. They had enough votes with the original four, with Bowman and Cori Bush, and with Mondaire Jones and Newman. They had enough to block Nancy Pelosi and force her to withdraw from the race. At that point, Nancy Pelosi's successor had to be someone who would be more lefty than Nancy Pelosi, because the center of the caucus was no longer where Nancy Pelosi was. Over the years, she had migrated to the right wing of the caucus. There would have had to have been a choice who was more in the center of the caucus. Someone like Jan Schakowsky or Debbie Dingell, maybe a Rosa DeLauro, maybe Karen Bass. There were 5 or 6 candidates who would have been a huge improvement over Pelosi, but from the progressive point of view. Yet the squad folded, got some small guarantees of things that they were not in a position to enforce. And Pelosi got the speakership again. When the American Rescue Plan came around, the $15 an hour piece was pulled out of the American Rescue Plan at the Senate level by Schumer. Now, Bernie, at the Senate level, actually let that happen. He could have gone to Schumer and he could have said, Chuck, you take that $15 an hour out of here, and I am not voting for the ARP. That's it. You deal with Manchin yourself. The way to deal with he and Sinema and the others who don't want the $15 an hour is to put this on the floor and dare them to vote against the ARP. That's what you do. Bernie never made that move. So the legislation was thrown back to the House without the $15 per hour. Nancy Pelosi could have put the $15 per hour right back in, sent it back over to the Senate, and called for a conference committee. At least she would have gotten the conference committee and part of the $15 an hour, if not the whole thing. She didn't do that. She let it go by. She pressured everybody to vote for it. It passed. Without everybody, she couldn't have passed it. Again, okay, the progressives had the power to block that. They did not block it. They did not force the $15 per hour back in the bill. That meant a lot to people, that $15 an hour. It was really significant. It's not a minor thing.
Right.
Okay. So we got these tough people who we, not just in their districts, we across the country helped to elect because we funded their campaigns. And they folded in both of the situations, okay, that I mentioned. Since that time, they've been a little tougher organizing with the rest of the CPC and with Jay Appal, who would be your fellow congressperson. There was a deal made this summer that there would be a $3.5 trillion by reconciliation bill passed. At the time, everybody signed off on it. I don't care what Manchin says. There are statements out that he gave the okay for the $3.5 trillion, and Sinema too. The deal was made, then they started, to negotiate again. Biden immediately folded. He should have told them, look, a deal's a deal. That's it. We're putting it on the floor this way. If you don't want to vote for it, then you don't get your infrastructure bill. That was the deal. Either you vote for it or there's nothing. That's what they should have been told by Biden. That's what they should have been told by Schumer. Nancy Pelosi was the backstop. She folded too. And she's evidently gotten the whole CPC to fold, including the squad.
Right.
Now, what progressives all over the country are running, those progressives who got the original squad elected, and Bush and Newman and Bowman too. What we're all wondering is, will you guys do the same thing? You all look great.
Yeah.
Stephanie, Jason, Parson, you all look terrific. Oakley in New Jersey, there are going to be about 15 people running who are going to look terrific, who are going to want funding support from us, online support from us, work on elections from us. I got to ask you the question.
Yeah.
How do we know you're not going to fold like they have? They all look great.
Yeah.
I
No,
mean,
I hear that.
Machida, at a victory machine, we're going to impeach his ass.
Mhm.
How do we know?
I think it's a good question.
It's not
Because-
just a good question. It's a vital question. And what's more, the key to the answer to the question is, can you walk away from the table even though there are good things in what they feed to you? Okay. And even though in the short run, those things are going to be good for your constituents. There are going to be some things, even in this reduced reconciliation bill, that help people. And yet this bill is a broken deal. And if you allow broken deals, you will not be taken seriously, ever. They will always think you will cave and you will fold.
So here's the way I look at things. So I'm a socialist, and I've been very clear about that. I've told, folks on Twitter, I'm an absolute socialist, not just because of my political values, but because I was born a socialist. I was raised in a socialist family. And so I also believe that you don't achieve a socialist political system from one day to the next. And so what that means to me is that whether I feel disappointed by the squad and their decisions right now, which I do, let me be clear, I do feel very disappointed and I want more from them. And I think they've made some very challenging and wrong decisions in a lot of their votes. But what I think they have made possible is space for people like myself, people like Rebecca, people like Jason and Imani, to be able to come in and be candidates who are not only further to the left, but who can do things that they haven't been able to do yet as new Congress people. And so, you're asking me, well, I think part of your question was, would I vote for Nancy Pelosi if, she was up for the speakership again? Under no circumstances would I vote for her. Under no circumstances. I also do not purport to know what goes on behind the scenes in Congress and what deals are being spun and what wheels people are working from. So with that, it is very challenging to know, what's actually happening behind the scenes. But I think that's a very big problem. I think it's a problem that all of this is done behind closed doors. And I think it needs to be brought out into the public. I know there are some things that can't be brought out into the public, but I do think it's very important for people to be knowing what types of negotiations are happening behind the scenes.
Okay, let me ask you a question, about
Yes.
that. Okay. Yeah. One of the problems, in my view, with the squad has been that they don't bring out front what is being talked about behind the scenes. They seem to have, on a day-to-day basis, severed their lines of communication with their base. In other words, when they're getting pressure from Jayapal or from others in the caucus to do a particular thing, they don't immediately run to their base and say, hey, I need your support. We're getting pressured to do this on that. And that's not what we agreed to. That's not what we ran on.
Yeah.
We need you to call everybody you know in Congress and create a ruckus about this, because this is going on. Every one of you has to report to your base negative pressure you're getting from on high. This is supposed to be a not me, us movement. Not me, us means you let in the us. And you don't make all the decisions without consulting us. That was the problem with Nina Turner and her campaign, too. It was all top down.
How do you think it was top down? I'm curious.
I think it was top down. I don't think she was communicating with her base. I don't think she was running the way her base wanted her to run.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, she knew a lot about that district, probably much more than her base because she's from that district and she knows everything about it. But it's not a question of whether the ultimate decision agrees with the base or does not agree with the base. It's about whether the candidate will explain to the base why they're making certain decisions and will take into account objections to those decisions. When I say take into account, I mean explain. Explain why you disagree. Explain why you want to go another way. Explain why you think it's best, if you do think it's best. But be open to the objections you're getting from the us.
Right.
And in the case of many of you, the us won't only be the people in your district,
Mm-hmm.
because you'll be getting a lot of support from outside of your district.
Yeah.
So, for example, because of certain decisions that AOC has made, okay, and never explained, she hasn't gotten a dollar from me for many, many months now. I decided when she offered those dollars to the conservatives in the caucus to win some points with the DNC, I said, no, those are my dollars. I never meant for them to go to those people who are opposed to everything that I stand for. I'm not going to tolerate it. I'm not giving you any more dollars. And I haven't given her any more dollars since then.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I agree that, we need to hold our legislators accountable. And to respond to your question earlier about how are folks going to know that I'm not going to be the same? I mean, the reality is you're not going to know until I'm there. And I'm just going to have to do my damnedest to ensure that I am sticking to what I say I'm going to do. And I think my history, of course, I could tell you all my history. I could tell you my track record. I could tell you my credentials and all these things about being 100% in it for the people and in it for community. But
point,
that
really,
matters. Go ahead.
That's true. But the key thing is this. Have you walked away from a deal because you did not get what you had to have in that deal? Have you ever had that experience where you stood up from the table and you said, I'm sorry, I can't accept that. I've promised other things to my constituents, and I can't accept what you're offering because it involves me breaking promises to my constituents. Have you ever done that?
Not in the situation, not in the form that you're proposing here. My experience is much more within the public school system and within labor unions. And so we've never had negotiations in that sense. But our negotiations are more around, so I have certainly walked away from things that I wanted, but I couldn't have everything because they were offering different things. And I had to make promises to the people that I've already representing under my position that I've been elected to, certainly. And of course, like I've made people very unhappy before with the decisions I've made, but they were decisions that were right. I maybe got in trouble for them. I maybe got called a communist for them. I maybe got called a socialist for them, but they were the right decisions. And ultimately, they did end up being good for the people that I was serving in my position. So absolutely. I mean, I've definitely been in positions where I've had to make decisions that were very challenging. And where people have held me to the fire because of it. And, that's part of the reason why I decided to run for Congress too, was because I was not happy with my labor union and the way that they not only were treating me, but treating other new up and coming labor leaders. And, I mentioned earlier that they're very in cahoots with the Democratic Party, and they basically single-handedly our labor union at the national level delivered a endorsement to Joe Biden because of behind the scenes backdoor deals
Yes.
with our Secretary of Education, or who was supposed to be our Secretary of Education according to the NEA. And that's one of the reasons why I decided, listen, I have to step away from this. There's another way to go about this. But that doesn't mean, that doesn't take away from my leadership or anything. It absolutely means that I'm maintaining my leadership status and doing it in a way that might make people a little bit pissed off at me, which is very often.
Okay, let me shift the questioning. Okay,
Yeah.
I think you've given the best answer that you can give in that circumstance. You're quite right. No one can know what you'll do until you get into the position, especially since you haven't been in that kind of position before.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me look at the moral integration, immigration system detail there. Okay, I had one thought,
Mm-hmm.
but just a few weeks ago. It doesn't actually apply specifically to your platform, but it just seemed to me a change in language, being a little more challenging might be useful in a campaign. Oh, you have something like that here actually already. I support the New Deal for New Americans Act to establish a national office of new Americans and provide new immigrants support and services they need to thrive. I think that is really very good. The phrase I was going to offer was just, instead of referring to undocumented people, it might be good to refer to them as undocumented Americans.
But that's assuming their identity. That's assuming they want to identify as Americans. I know my husband doesn't want to identify as American.
Okay, that does assume. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so, undocumented taxpayers. Okay.
I'm sure there are plenty of undocumented people who want to identify as Americans, but honestly, the
Yes,
ones that I know.
I'm sure that's true. I think that we old Americans need to have the undocumented Americans.
Yeah.
We've always needed new blood here. We've always gotten wonderful benefits from new people who came here. My own family is part of the immigrant experience. It's been a couple of generations now, but my grandparents came here on both sides.
Where'd they come from?
My mother's family came from Austria-Hungary. It's called actually Ruthenia is the area they came from.
Okay.
It was part of Austria-Hungary back then. And my father's family came from Częstochowa in Poland, which is, it's a suburb outside, of Warsaw. I'm not sure it's exactly a suburb, but more accurately, it was a Catholic shrine city, is a Catholic shrine city that's close to Warsaw.
Okay.
So that's where they came from. And they were part of the Russian Pale of Settlement at that time, because it was before Poland got its independence back. Mm-hmm. So they came from those two different regions. They were part of the immigrant experience in New York City. They settled in the same neighborhood, in New York City. And they met, and married. They got into what, we spoke of as the melting pot. at that time. Okay, it
Mhm.
really was a melting pot. And for them, it was great. Uh, there was uh, there was nothing in Europe actually for them at that time. They were part of the outgroups, okay, in Europe, and there was a lot, okay, of anti-Semitism. They came sufficiently early; they didn't have to encounter the Nazis. Uh, Actually, my grandfather came over. My mother's side came over prior to World War II, and my grandparents on my father's side came from Russia. He was drafted into the army for the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 and 1905. And when the war was over, he had to find his way back to Poland. It was a long trip. He suffered a lot.
Yeah.
Uh, his health was always bad after that. Okay, it was never the same.
Hmm.
He came to the United States. He died about 6 weeks before I was born. I was supposed to be named after him, but my other grandfather, who came over just before the First World War, stowed away on a ship. Uh, no contact between he and my grandmother for 2 years, and then he sent for her. Uh, he was running away from the Kaiser's army,
Mm.
so he never got involved in the First World War. I'm talking about the Austrian Kaiser, they called uh, the ruler of Austria the Kaiser, because, you know, that was German. So
Mhm.
uh, anyway, he was killed, in an automobile accident when it was snowing out about 19 days before I was born. So at that point, I got his name.
Wow.
His name was Joseph Spiegel. I'm very aware, okay, of my immigrant roots and my
Mm.
parents' experience
Yeah.
as the children of immigrants, okay, in New York City.
I identify with that 100%. It's important. Part
Sure.
of who you are.
Yes, it's always been a part, okay, of who I am. They were not politically sophisticated. They were not socialists. I don't call myself a socialist now, primarily because uh, there was an older definition of socialism that was prevalent during the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s. I did not identify with that idea, okay, of socialism because I'm a social scientist. I was educated that way, and it didn't seem to me that Marxism really made any sense. There were different things wrong with it from the point of view of empirical social science. So, at a fairly early age, I ceased to believe in Marxian socialism. I was always very heavily in favor of government intervention, okay, in the economy. I never believed in the market economy. Okay, I never believed in the Marxian version of class conflict, but I do believe in class conflict. And I'm very aware, okay, of the oligarchy now.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the primary reason why I don't call myself a democratic socialist now is because I haven't been able to find characterizations of socialism that seem to me to fit the label of socialism that I grew up actually learning. And I don't like to change the definitions, okay, of words. I would rather arrive, okay, at new labels that are more appropriate for this period of time. I don't think the classical socialism actually applies, but in many ways and in spirit, what does apply has the same concern for human beings and the same kind of humanism, okay, in back of it. So I appreciate people who call themselves democratic socialists. They seem to believe pretty much the same things that I believe, but there just seems to be a difference, okay, of labels. When I see democratic socialists like yourself, okay, and Bernie Sanders, I don't know if there's a hair's breadth of difference, between what I believe, okay, and what they believe. You call yourself what you want to call yourself, I guess.
Yeah. And I mean, just to add on to what you're saying, I call myself a socialist, and I do base it in Marxist theory. However, I also am of the belief that not everything that I've read that's Marxist is correct and should be implemented. And so I'm definitely a socialist, but I do like to change the definition of words, unlike you. Like, I do very much like to, make my political ideologies my own. And I don't need a definition for any particular ideology that I have in order to adhere to it. So, but I hear what you're saying for sure.
Okay, just to say something just a little different. There's a great deal of difference between the Marx of the economic and philosophical manuscripts, okay, and the Marx, okay, of Capital, or the Marx, of the Manifesto.
Mm-hmm.
In some ways, well, of course, in some ways those are the same people, but in some ways they're different people. And different ideologies can be developed from different writings of Marx, okay, at different times. I think the Marx of the economic and philosophical manuscripts is really much more in line with with certain aspects of modern society. But anyway, we'll be getting into philosophy here, and this is not about philosophy. So let us leave the philosophy.
I love it.
Okay, and let us go back to your platform. Okay.
Yes.
So, okay, I really love the changes to the immigration system that you have set out here. And I certainly do support them. Okay? I certainly do agree with them. I just had that small comment, okay, I made, and
Yeah.
I take your objection to the comment. I think it's quite a valid objection. So, moving on to worker power. I have another question when it comes to worker power.
Yeah.
Now, of course, I'm all for a living wage. I'm for a federal jobs guarantee. After all, okay, I'm an MMT political economist. I won't call myself, okay, an MMT economist because my degree is not in economics. Okay, it's in political science. So certainly, I'm very much for the federal jobs guarantee. In particular, Pavlina Chernyeva's version of the federal jobs guarantee, okay, is where I'm at. I embellish it somewhat for myself, and that leads to another question that I have. By the way, I'm all for the specifics, like repeal Provision 14B in the Taft-Hartley Act that allows states to pass the right to work laws. I always hated those.
Yeah.
Since I was a teenager, I was opposed to those things. I like the idea of companies making over 100 million a year. By the way, is that 100 million a year in sales or 100 million a year in profits?
That's a good question. I think that's something that I don't know the answer to in my own document. I'm gonna have to look at it.
Okay, so perhaps you want to think about that.
Yeah.
Okay, to raise the wage act, to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, I have a question about that. It may be that $15 an hour is a living wage in the lowest cost area in this country, but it's not a living wage anywhere else.
Great.
If I were formulating this, what I would do is to be specific and say raise the minimum wage to $15 per hour with cost of living adjustments above the lowest cost area in the United States.
Mm.
And then specify, for example, that in the highest cost area of the United States, that might be X dollars. I suspect that highest cost area is probably going to be New York City, and probably the living wage in New York City is more like $33 an hour or something like that. I think there should be a range which would be achieved through the cost adjustment that I specify. But I think every American should be earning a living wage, that should be a right. And by the way, that means that the federal jobs guarantee should be paying the living wage. Also, if the federal jobs guarantee is paying the living wage, that becomes the de facto living wage. And then one doesn't need to pass the Raise the Wage Act. If you pass the federal jobs guarantee, that's going to be enough.
Right.
Because everybody will have to pay more than the federal jobs guarantee living wage. And so that also has to be defined but through a minimum living wage for that program and then cost adjustments, okay, across the United States. But what I meant to really ask you about that here is you obviously have a very great concern for when workers are empowered to collectivize the entire labor force. It's not to advance, okay, advances. So, okay, I see that. I'm all for the collectivization. Sometimes, though, it might not take place through labor unions. It might occur through worker cooperatives.
Yeah.
Why is that not in your program?
That's a great question. It's not something that I've thought about to put in. And I'd say that I don't have that much experience with worker cooperatives. So I would definitely like to learn a little bit more about that and what that entails.
Okay, the place to learn more about that is probably Richard Wolff's site. Okay, it's Wolff, WOLFF. He's a democratic socialist, and his specialty is democracy at work. Okay, he's a retired, he's a professor emeritus from the University of Massachusetts, okay, in Amherst. He now teaches at the New School, okay, in New York. And he's teaching democracy at work there. Still has PhD students, still extremely active. He's all over the internet these days. His specialty is on the worker cooperatives.
Okay, I'm going to have to look into it right away.
Okay, and he teaches Marx a lot too.
Okay.
He's a Marxist.
Thank you for putting me onto that. I'm definitely going to look into it.
Okay, I'll put down in the comments the spelling, his full name, okay, and the spelling. He's also known, as Rick Wolf, kind of informally, and widely. So that was the labor union part of your platform. I'm sorry, that was the worker power part, the third plank that you dealt with. So you're for gender justice.
Absolutely.
And so am I. Increase access to mental health care, ensure full reproductive rights and bodily autonomy for women, including protecting Roe v. Wade, which today means actually legislating Roe v. Wade, because the Supreme Court is not going to protect it.
Yeah.
That's become apparent. Yeah, repeal the Hyde Amendment, of course. Pass the Violence Against Women Act, absolutely. Decriminalize sex work, absolutely. Drastically expand the WIC program, yes. Protect and enforce Title IX, ensure sexual harassment and violence in the military is prosecuted, absolutely. Protect our trans siblings through legislative action, normalize the use of pronouns in government agencies, yes. Immediately direct funding to nonprofit organizations that serve trans and non-binary communities. Certainly a very progressive program, in the gender justice area.
Thank you.
And now we get to demilitarization. Yes, I want to ask you about that in connection with one of your other planks here. Honor indigenous sovereignty, decrease military spending, ending military since Saudi Arabia. Yes, I'm for all of these things, but these things, of course, are also connected to another one of your planks, and that plank is ethical foreign policy.
Yeah.
As the daughter of Chilean refugees who were directly impacted by an imperialist U.S. foreign policy agenda, specifically the overthrow of the Allende regime, one of my main priorities as a U.S. representative will be to direct the United States towards ethical foreign policy, which I take to mean the end of imperialist foreign policy.
Yes.
And the pursuit of foreign policies that are collaborative with other nations, providing, as you say, global solidarity, also mutual support, and respecting the autonomy of foreign governments. And in Latin America, that means backing off all attempts to undermine governments that were freely elected by the people, which of course means backing off all of the attempts that we currently are pursuing in Latin America to overthrow governments everywhere in Latin America.
Right.
That's going to be a tall order. I'm completely in back of the effort. However, I'd be very glad for you to undertake that effort. How do you propose to get even the more lefty members of the Democratic Party in Congress behind you with respect to that? But by and large, those newly elected Congress people have been fairly afraid to step outside of the mainstream when it's come to foreign policy.
Yeah.
So how do you expect to lead the way on that?
Well, I expect to lead the way first and foremost because of my own personal and familial experiences. I think most of the folks who are, what we would consider progressive right now, a few of them that I can think of, namely Rashida Tlaib, have direct experience with the impacts of the U.S. regime and foreign policy mistakes that we've made for generations and generations. But the way that I've found success in the work that I've been able to accomplish as an educator and a labor organizer is by being straightforward, being honest, being truthful about the systems that we function within, and not playing games about it. And for me, I'm nervous to go into a political system that requires any legislator who comes into it to be or to give up parts of themselves, right? But I absolutely
Yes.
have no intention of giving up any parts of myself going into being a legislator. And so I think leading is going to be very natural for me on this particular, sticking point of ethical foreign policy. And I did want to also point out that I'm realizing that there's a mistake on my website because we're supposed to take out that demilitarization because it's supposed to be embedded into the ethical foreign policy.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. I was like, what are you talking about? It's not supposed to be on there.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, sorry about that. And
Okay, so I wanted to skip to Medicare for All for a moment.
yeah.
Okay. What will you do to facilitate actually bringing about Medicare for All, keeping in mind that things do not look good for the Democrats now in 2022, which means things are going to look terrible for the Democrats in 2024 as well.
Right.
And we may be looking at another period of heavy Republican control, partial Republican control starting in 2023, and then much heavier control by the Republicans from 2025 through 2028, and maybe even longer if the Republicans are successful in setting up a dictatorship at the national level, which they seem very bent on doing at this particular point in the development of the United States. That is clearly a real danger. So, given that as background, in politics, how will you pursue getting us Medicare for all? Oops. It looks like we lost her. Well, okay, I hope.
I kept getting a signal that there was trouble with the thing, and it would resume.
Okay, I hope Stephanie comes back in. I think you can tell she's very brilliant and also very determined and very honest. Really, another ideal candidate. You have three wonderful candidates coming from Washington, at this point. So I do hope she comes back. I'm going to begin to go over the comments, at this point. I hope that she will be able to come back. Oh, she says her power just went out, so she may not be back. She says it's raining really hard now. I'm just going to tell her that's fine. That's fine. I'll
Do it again.
answer questions. Okay, so I'll go through the questions. What I was trying to go for here, with Medicare for All, of course, was to ask her to lay out a strategy to get to Medicare for all in that kind of a political position. I thought that was important. I also wanted to talk to her about campaign finance reform. And we can look for a minute at what she had to say about that on her website. So I'm going to share that part of her platform. The part on campaign finance reform. There we go. So I'm sharing that now. She points out candidates spent a total of $14 billion running for federal office in 2020.
It came up again about the video signal.
Okay. Well, I'll know if she signs back in, because
Okay.
there's a little beep that occurs if she comes back in. She talks about Adam Smith raising $1.3 million and spending $931,000 to hold on to his seat, despite Sarah Smith spending less than $20,000. He burned through even larger amounts in 2018, outspending progressive challenger Sarah Smith almost 15-1. She says, our campaign has pledged to not accept any contributions from corporate PACs. How did we get here? She goes through the Supreme Court decisions, Buckley versus Vallejo. When someone brings up campaign finance, the first words to come to mind are probably Citizens by United. So she talks about that. She talks about the Supreme Court. And she's for publicly funded elections, shining light on dark money. She's for the People Act. She wants to amend the Constitution. But of course, she knows that's going to take a long time. She evidently doesn't know about using Article 3, Section 2 to stop the Supreme Court from actually reviewing new campaign finance laws. So she needs to know about that. I was going to inform her about that. I was also going to try to find out what her plans were to actually get a Medicare for all, with respect to Medicare for all strategy in the political environment we may be entering, okay, at this point. So I did want to talk to her about that too. So hopefully I'll get a chance in the future. Applying for Medicare for all looks very good. She's for NEMA. She's for HR 1976. And she supports the through the states strategy here, which is what I was going to get at. She cites in her platform, one way we can help to develop these campaigns for single payer is to pass HR 3775, Ro Khanna's state-based Universal Health Act. And of course, that would be a great thing that we could do. It says, as a member of Congress, I will not just co-sponsor Medicare for All on paper. I'll work with the Medicare for All grassroots to develop a mass movement and champion the bill through to a vote and passage through the House. So she has a strategy. It's probably the most viable strategy right now. So that would have come out in the question and answer process if she did not have to go. Okay, I'm going to move now. Let's see if there's anything else that's really essential. I'm just going to take a quick look at her building our clean energy future, because that's very important. She also has something to say on police surveillance that I think may be very important. Of course, she's against fossil fuels and wants to get rid of them. She sees the connection between climate-intensified forest fires, hurricanes, and famines, and are using fossil fuels. And she's for a just transition to clean energy. Of course, she talks about emissions of carbon dioxide, and talks about a bigger role for the federal government, since the market is clearly failing to provide renewable energy fast enough for the scale of the need. She's talking about having a smart grid, but getting that done, in record time. She says research and development is an excuse for delay. While it is true that improvements to batteries and other potential storage technologies for long-haul transportation will ultimately broaden the areas of the economy where renewable energy can be reliably and inexpensively used to complete the transition, it is urgent to accelerate the pace forward using technology that exists but today. And that is very true. But that is very apt. I'm getting the impression from her platform and from the way she spoke tonight that she is very well informed and has thought through a lot of this stuff. And she's very much interested in getting rid of fossil fuels as soon, as possible. There's nothing wrong with her verbiage. There's nothing wrong with the way she expresses these things. There are no odd formulations. It's very straightforward. Now, in federal policing and surveillance, I will use my position in Congress to always fight for policies and budgets and prioritize rehabilitation over incarceration and prevention over punishment. She wants to limit surveillance by federal agencies. The systematic and extreme surveillance exposed by Ed Snowden's courageous revelations have not been fully addressed, even as Snowden himself will soon complete 10 years of exile, prosecuted by both Democratic and Republican administrations. By the way, before I go any further, I'm going to do something that, I promised to do. It's a little bit of a commercial. I don't normally do commercials here, but this is very, very important, and I was reminded by the Snowden thing to do this, so I'm going to share something else for you to see. Sorry. That was an invite. And I want to share the screen here. And this is what you should be seeing now is an advertisement for the Netflix smear of Julian Assange, a protest, which will be occurring on Tuesday, October 26th at, I believe, 12 noon, okay, in New York. KRTD Media, President Shane Coughlin will be leading a protest outside of the New York Netflix headquarters in response to a smear movie they are releasing about Julian Assange. There will be in-person speakers and recorded statements. On October 26, 2021 at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. For more info, call 929-340-7079. There are going to be some very good speakers there. Bashari Snuggs, the primary organizer of M4M for All, is going to be there speaking. Edwin from New York City, who we interviewed you just Thursday night, is going to be there and will be speaking. Okay, and by further, Ramona Masacci is going to be there, and she will be speaking. And there are going to be a number of other speakers too. I believe at least 6, and there may be more than 6. I wish that I could be there speaking, but of course, I'm in Washington, and I'm also lacking funds, so I won't be able to make the trip up to New York for this. But it is very important. Okay, the UK courts are soon to act, okay, on Julian. This smear has got to be taken off the table as anything valid. It is outrageous that they're trying to smear Julian at this point. We should see to it that it costs them something. It costs Netflix something to smear Assange, okay, at this time. We should do all we can to make that happen. Okay, so thank you for staying for this. I should have shared this a little bit earlier, but still, we still have some of the program to go, and there are still 10 of you here, so that's good. So I'll stop sharing this now, and I'll go back to Stephanie's platform. So, of course, the government spying on and interfering with U.S. citizens exercising their constitutional rights is nothing new. The U.S. Senate Church Committee exposed CIA dirty tricks on U.S. soil, as well as downright evil activities overseas, and the FBI's counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO, is infamous for its targeting of civil rights, anti-war, and Black Power activists. I can tell you that this kind of targeting was going on during the 1960s. We had FBI people at anti-Vietnam War demonstrations during the 1960s. One of the first protests that I was at was a protest against certain possibilities in the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1961, just after John Kennedy became president of the United States. And there were FBI agents at that protest. They were peaceful. There was no beating up of protesters at that point. Ours was a peaceful protest. But we were used to seeing FBI agents at protests all through the 1960s. We didn't see CIA agents then, as far as we know, but we did see FBI agents routinely going to lefty protests. And of course, that's been a constant all through the years, for 60 years now. Okay, that's been going on. We have to stop the surveillance. I think the surveillance in itself is a violation of the constitutional rights of Americans. Of course, this court will never find it so, which is why we have to get rid of this court. So, Stephanie cites the Government Accountability Project. The federal government has been ramping up prosecution of whistleblowers over the past few years. This is a bipartisan problem and can be traced in part to the power of the military-industrial complex. Sadly, a constitutional lawyer, President Barack Obama, charged more whistleblowers under the 1917 Espionage Act than all previous administrations combined, going back almost a century. We must put into place much stronger whistleblower protection. As a member of Congress, I will work to revamp the century-old Espionage Act and to limit its scope only to acts of espionage and not courageous acts performed by whistleblowers. And that, of course, is exactly what we need. We need the Espionage Act as it is operated today to be a dead letter. It's never used for spies. It's used to expose, it's used to prosecute those who expose the crimes of the government. We got to stop that. Being a whistleblower has to be protection enough against prosecution, automatic protection against prosecution. That is what we need to be a free society. We need the exposures by the whistleblower. We need the government to be kept honest. We need the government to be afraid of whistleblowers in its ranks and to have that as a permanent fear, so they know there is somebody policing them. Who will police the police? We need people to police the police. Those are the whistleblowers. We need to make that fully legal. Stephanie talks about the 1033 program, the Pentagon's 1033 program, transferring perfectly functional surplus military equipment to local police forces. This is a win for military contractors. The main losers are average citizens, especially those living, in majority, the Black, Indigenous, people of color communities who find themselves looking down the barrel of military-style weapons. Absolutely, absolutely. We never had to face this in the 1960s. For years, the ACLU and other civil rights groups have been warning about the dangers of the militarization of the police. In 2014, ACLU warned that the militarization of police encourages officers to adopt a warrior mentality and think of the people they're supposed to serve as enemies. I couldn't agree more. 2017, a research paper showed there's a direct correlation between the police departments receiving lethal equipment from the military and increases in police violence. It's time to end this misguided and wasteful program. My opponent, as chair of the House Armed Services Committee, has had the power to do just that if he were willing to use his power and influence and go against the wishes of his defense industry funders. As a member of Congress, I will prioritize this issue and fight for total elimination of the 1033 program. And she wants to apply, Stephanie does, Title VI programs of the 1964 Civil Rights Act to police departments. Most policing and most instances of police violence happen at the local and state level. This does not mean the federal government is powerless in these matters. Sherilyn Ifill, the brilliant president of the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund, and former University of Maryland law professors made the case that Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 could and should be used to cut federal funding to any local police department that is found to engage in racial discrimination. I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. She gives examples here of that, which I will not go through. As a member of Congress, I will demand the federal government apply the Title VI provisions of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to all state and local government entities, including police departments. The law is already on the books. Let's enforce it. And hopefully pressure from her will help to enforce it. I really hope she gets elected. She has a wonderful platform. I am in her corner. As of now, she has my endorsement.
Mhm.
I think she is a great candidate. I think the three Washington candidates that we've talked about on the program here, Jason Call, Rebecca Parson, and Stephanie Gallardo, are three wonderful candidates. I'm going to go back to the beginning now and consider your comments and statements. Amber mentions Laura Fielding says hello to Kay Clark Ryan. Amber Grigo says at 9:10. Roberto Alvarenga Lovato. Padan Kavalik. I think these are the names of Stephanie's family. But she mentions Eva Corrine Bartlett. Okay, and Aaron Mate. I asked, whether Aaron Mate, who of course I know very well, but from the gray zone, his part of the gray zone. I was not aware his family was from Chile. Amber seems to be indicating that here. Carmen says, wow, I'm so impressed already. Go Stephanie. Amber says, abolish ICE. Jason says, abolish ICE. Carmen says, when I went to German-American school in Germany as a kid, they would have a class outside. We go on zoo field trips and write essays about what we learned while sitting around in the zoo as a class. It's the U.S. warehousing of children for the sake of neoliberalism that is so ineffective. It is. Jeff Denton says, immigration and naturalization, INS, but that name wasn't decisive enough, so they changed it to Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE. Jason Call, the Patriot Act, yes, the Patriot Act. Holly Corn says, late, but here listening, Biden folded it like a cheap suit. She says, some leadership. Carmen says, hi, Holly, I always like your company. Hello, Dr. Joe. Oh, by the way, somebody told me Holly Horn was coming to the protest in New York, the Julian Assange protest. Holly Horn says, hello, Dr. Joe. Holly Horn says, hi, Carmen, ditto. Carmen says, thank you, Holly. Jeffrey Denton says they won't get matching funding if they violate their loyalty pledge to the Democratic Party, which is the leverage that Nancy Pelosi has over them. Well, they're just going to have to go without their matching funding. I'm sure if they tell everybody they're going without their matching funding, they'll raise the matching funding. Holly Horn says, good on you for asking that. Hi, Jason Call. Hi, Lana. Holly Horn says, that's right, Dr. Joe. Talk is cheap. Lana says, hi, Holly. And Joe says, hi, Holly. Carmen says, break it on down, Joe. This is giving me chills. I should really have done that in my interview last week with Terrence Cudney. I think that I was not emphatic enough in my questioning, okay, of Terrence, who, if you compare Terrence's platform with Stephanie's platform here tonight, you see a radical difference in these two platforms. When you look, okay, at Terrence's platform, it doesn't look like a very progressive type of platform. He's for Medicare for all right, and for state-based Medicare for all, too. But in general, you just don't go down all the different subjects that represent problems our society is having right now and get statements about what he would do about those problems. His is not that kind of issues discussion. It's very different. Carmen Munin says, by India Walton of Buffalo, and Ghostart says, Schumer endorsed India. Holly Horn says, hello, Ghostart. That's Steve. Nina hired Chuck Weaver. It's not Chuck Weaver, it's what the hell is Weaver's first name again? It'll come to me. It's not Chuck, though. Aaron Mate is a Canadian journalist and a reporter for the Gray Zone. Yes, I think he is, but I also wonder whether he came from Chile originally, okay, as an immigrant. Holly says they don't hold themselves accountable. Holly Horn, good on you, Dr. Joe. It is intolerable. Well, it's not intolerable. You just don't give money anymore. That's all. Carmen says the squad isn't exposing the corruption to their supporters. They're being silent about it. They are. Carmen Muniz says, Holly Horn, they're becoming part of it. Carmen says, yep, Holly, I think so, especially hence the Act Blue Strikers Fund. I don't trust it. Holly Horn says, honest answer. Carmen says, what alternative strike fund have you found? Laugh out loud. Holly Horn says, the unions used to have strike funds. Ghostart says, Fauci exposed puppy killer gain of function developers Sunday morning. Shows should be interesting. I bet Facebook still is not going to reactivate my account. Maybe not. Carmen says, I'll let you do all the donating. Jeffrey says, sometimes I wouldn't mind being an undocumented American. Lana says, Carmen, I love you, but on this point, you were lame 2 days ago and now again tonight. Holly Horn says, granddaughter of Polish immigrant here. Holly Horn says, yes, the Black Madonna. The Black Madonna of Shestakova, right? And Carmen Yuna says, my point, Lana, is about the squad assimilated with the progressives. Jeff says, anti-socialism seems to be the biggest issue that the globalists are attacking the people of the world with right now. Yeah. Seems to be their biggest issue. What they ought to do is MYOB, mind their own business. Lana Dell says, your point included strike funds. Probably should have avoided including that after our discussion 2 days ago. Carmen says, don't try to silence me, Lana. Lana says, the strike fund to Act Blue was via direct email from Bernie. It's fine to donate somewhere else that you're more comfortable, but it just looks like you're being negative and making excuses. And Lana says, challenging you is not silencing you. Get a grip. If you can't take my challenge, then don't bring it up. Holly Owen says, to be honest, ready socialist communists aren't politically sophisticated. I mean, in terms of political theory, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's conscience. Yeah, I certainly agree, Holly. I don't have a problem with that. But I think that Stephanie is politically sophisticated. Jeff Denton says, to me, socialism simplified would be if anyone wants to get somewhere, they all need to pitch in for gas money. Now, once we did that, on that 1960 trip, I took out to California, the car broke down. We all pooled our money to buy a new car. We pitched in for a car, and then we pitched in for gas money.
How'd you eat?
Huh?
How did you eat?
Well, we still had enough money for food. We managed to eat.
Wow.
We ate where we could. We didn't suffer on that trip. And some black families in the ghetto were kind enough to put us up. It was actually in what later became known as Watts. They showed us fine hospitality. Carmen said, challenging me because I think the strikers' fund of Act Blue is just another money pilfering scheme for the DNC. I don't want folks to keep wasting their money on establishment. It seems you don't want me to bring it up because it's challenging your cognitive dissonance about the burden of the squad. I'm not a fan. Matter of fact, I wish people could get their donations back. Steve Day says, Pavlina Archernievas frequently asks questions on the FJG and gives the link to Pavlina's job guarantee fact. Thank you, Steve Day. That's a very useful link. And Lana says, you have no interest in or intention of actually donating to any strike fund last. Quite right, Dr. Joe. Here in New York City, a living wage would be $33 an hour. Oh, was I really right on the money on that? That was a guess off the top of my head, Holly. I wasn't clear about that. I guess that's close to $70,000 a year. Boy, hard to live in New York City. Lana says, I have way too much going on to deal with bullshitters. No patience for it. Bye, Carmen. Oh, come on, Lana. Marvin says, you don't know that. If I do, you'll never know. Yeah, bye, Lana. You're dismissed. Holly Horn says, economist, yes, democracy at work. Yeah, Medicare for all. I'll send the link. I'll send the name, Rick Wolf's name. Okay, and also send a link to his site by Twitter, DM to Stephanie. That's how we've communicated anyway. Holly Horn says, criminal justice. Evelyn says, what is really behind the attack on Roe v. Wade? Population growth? No, it's ideology. It is ideology. Fundamentalist Christian ideology and Catholic ideology. But the Catholic hierarchy has always been against Roe v. Wade. Now, Catholics in general, are not against it. But there are a minority of Catholics who are against it. That minority probably includes Amy Coney Barrett. Jeff Weaver, right. Jeff Weaver, exactly. Ghostot said they should back off the self-sanctioning here too. Jeff Denton says pretty much feels like we're in a period of Republican control right now. Holly Horn says DAG lost power. Carmen says I'd love to move to Washington. Laura Fielding says Stephanie has also endorsed whole Washington, and also remember that she spoke at the Seattle March for Medicare for All. Thank you, Laura, for pointing that out. And Lana says, oh, geez, can she come back on her phone? Stephanie says, I'm sorry, you all, but my power went out. I'll be in touch after the stream is over, Stephanie, on about Twitter, DM. I don't know if you'll be able to see that, but you'll be able to see it tomorrow morning. So we'll arrange for another time to finish up with you. And Laura says, good suggestion, Lana. And Laura Fielding says, Stephanie Gallardo, Lara, sorry about that, but what you did get in was a great interview. It was. Stephanie says, thank you, Laura. I'm so embarrassed. Laura says, I'll need to duck out early as well because I need to create an official Facebook event for November 19th and 20th. I promised Halia Perkle to get that up today. Okay, Laura, you definitely must keep your promise. And Carmen says, will amending the Constitution open the floodgates for the Republicans to try to tweak it in their favor? Laura says, I love that you list that strategy on your website, Stephanie. Now, I will certainly share your website. Holly Horn says, good question, Carmen. That you support it through the state strategy, and we continue to work with the grassroots to build a mass movement. Right. Stephanie is with us, Laura. Carmen says, thank you, Holly. Holly says, YW. I'm not sure what YW means. And she says, yes, we see it. Yes, noon, 2:45, West 17th Street in New York. Carmen says, speaking of federal budgets, I wonder if Mrs. Gallardo knows how it's paid for. Well, Stephanie did indicate some knowledge of MMT, so I'm sure she knows how it's paid for. And Evelina says, did everyone see the Belmarsh Tribunal on Julian Assange? Which one? Was there a meeting of the tribunal today, Evelina? Holly Horn says, Edwin De Jesus, wonderful. Carmen says, man, I wish I could go. Evelina says, I hate the Netflix. And Go Start, Steve says, thousands came out in London to support Julian Assange today. Wonderful. Holly Horn says, thank you for sharing. Carmen says, that's fantastic. Go Start. Jeff says, thanks for the commercial, Joe. I'm Facebook friends with Stella Morris, so make sure she knows all about the event. Make sure she knows the organizer. And the sponsor of the event is KRTD Media. Holly Horn says, I watched it. Go Start. Lana says, I wish I was closer. Hope it's a good turnout. Hashtag free Assange. Holly says, COINTELPRO. Yes. Carmen says, I never watch Netflix. Matter of fact, I don't either. Holly Horn says, don't have cable. Carmen says, I'm trying to figure out how I can disconnect my roommate's Netflix. Carmen said, how did you recognize the FBI at those protests, Joe, by their penny loafers and black suits? Evelina, I mean, who else would wear suits to protests? Evelina says, actually, I was dressed in a pretty nice overcoat for that suit, actually myself, because we were all trying to give the impression that we were just respectable citizens exercising our civil liberties. This was back in 1961, remember. Evelyn is especially when they're authentic. Assange was never accused of presenting false information, I know, not once. And Holly Horn says, in theory, police work for us, for civilians. We need to make that in practice also, Holly. They have to know they work for us. It has to be apparent that authority has come to be felt, okay, among them. Steve Day says, Laura Fielding on Netflix protests, smear, okay, of Julian Assange. And Laura did have a YouTube video on that as well. I'm cutting a segment for them too. Keep mine to 1 minute. I haven't cut it yet. I'll probably do it tomorrow. In fact, I know I'll do it tomorrow. Carmen says that's what the squad should be doing, whistleblowing. That is, the squad should be whistleblowing. And Ghost Start says Carmen Muniz that and other self-IDs like armbands, wristbands, passage, etc. Carmen says the Gestapo brings tanks and crowd control vehicles to our recreational park get-togethers. It's meant to instill fears. Carmen says good idea, Ghost Start. And Holly Storm says, Carmen, they busted up a group playing violins like Elijah McLean. Holly Horn says it's all they were doing. I remember that, Holly. I know the shelter pets miss him. Jeff Weaver, right? It's Jeff Weaver. Holly Horn says, yes, Carmen and Chuck Rocha. Gostart says Aaron Mate was born in Vancouver to Ray Mate, a visual artist and illustrator of children's books, okay, and Gaber Mate, a physician, author, columnist, and a Holocaust survivor. Yes, I knew that he was a Holocaust survivor. I didn't know whether he was at one time in Chile. And Laura says, Aaron Mate's father is Hungarian, but Canadian. Yes, he probably came from a similar community as my grandfather and grandmother. Carmen, but they got out of there, of course, way before the Holocaust. Carmen Muniz says, sorry, Hokie, who is Rocha? Chuck Rocha is, was the guy who was running the Hispanic side of the Bernie campaign. He was very successful in the Nevada primaries, not as successful in California and in Texas. Lana says, your guest was great. Sorry she was cut off by the power outage. I'm going to have her back. Carmen says, attack against women's Roe v. Wade is also the result of Project Blitz infiltration. Holly says, no biggie, Carmen. Rocha's another one Bernie hired. Yes, Bernie did hire Chuck, who was on Rising quite a bit during the campaign. He was Rising's favorite Hispanic organizer. And Ghost Start says on 27th October, I should say Latinx organizer. That's the proper term at this point. Garza says on 27th, 28th October, justice itself will be on trial at the High Court in London. when two judges decide if Julian Assange, the epic truth teller, is to be extradited to America. Carmen says, oh, they actually let folks know they were FBI? No, it was just very, very obvious. Ghostdot says, the OSU 54-7 over Indiana. What made it obvious was that some of them were taking pictures. They would take pictures and they could put our faces in the files at that time. Carmen says, Trump should have pardoned Julian. Just to irk the Dems, laugh out loud. Actually, the Obama administration had by then decided that it was problematic to try Julian. They were kind of giving up on the idea at the time. Maybe that's why Trump did not pardon him. Who knows? Anyway, we're ended, folks. So, I intend to invite Stephanie back to finish up because we did not finish up and she's real interesting. I said in color of the day showed who was FBI. Well, that and they were taking pictures and they also didn't quite look like the rest of us who would come to the protests. These were really student protests at that time. Dolores says, thank you for a great discussion and show. And thank you, Dolores, for helping out, as you always do. And good night. Okay, to the rest of you, we still can't see Kay Clark Ryan here when she comments. If any of you have any inkling of how to solve this problem, I would be happy for some advice on this subject. I don't know how to do it. Everybody else coming in on Facebook seems to be fine, but Kay can't seem to come in on Facebook. I don't know why that's the case. I have no idea why. I would love to get her back in here. Love to get her back in here. I really miss her. So if you got any advice, let me know. Please let me know. Okay, thank you, folks. I'm going to end right now, and I'll see you on Tuesday, if not before.